Check one, two. All right, looks like it's going. All right, so got a couple things. So today we're going to start talking about your project four, or your final project, not project four. So I guess it's project five. But we're going to go through a quick introduction to some of the different basics of cameras and in terms of video. So how do we like choose different frame rates, choose different resolutions and sizes? What do those mean? What advantages and disadvantages are there? So we're going to go through that. We're going to start talking about how we're going to set up the different types of shots we want to get. And as a result, I wanted to show you. Somebody had asked if they could do more of a narrative mini documentary style for this. And I said, yeah, I've seen a couple people do that. So I wanted to show you one, and it's here in the, when you look into Project 5 and you've got the examples, I put one in here as a narrative story, and it's from a student named Nick Rossetti a few semesters ago. So I'm just going to play this because it's maybe the most interesting narrative style storytelling mini documentary that I've ever seen. But I want you to pay close attention to the different shot types that they used at different points to communicate different feelings in this. So this was Nick's first ever video, I think, to create. So yeah, check this out.
All right, friends. So today we are interviewing my friend Maggie. And by interviewing, I mean asking her one simple question, and that is about her worst date. It's a really fun one. Stay tuned, and that is all. Enjoy. All right, Max, tell me about your worst date.
So my worst date was with a guy named Zach from Tinder. He was very nice, and we had a great conversation over the phone. We texted for about a month before we went out because that month I got my first ever car crash, so I could not drive to go on a date with them. We ended up going on a date to Shelby Park in East Nashville. We wanted to eat while we were there, have like a little picnic because it was during the mid part of the pandemic. So before I got to the park, I picked up sushi from one of my favorite places called Bang Bang Hibachi Grill. So I went and I picked it up. I bought all of it. I go to the park. He can't find where I normally park at to eat at the picnic table. So I'm directing him there. He finally gets there. I'm sitting at a park bench and I've been there for about 15 minutes. He walks up, stands over me, and doesn't say anything. When I finally notice his shadow, I look up and I go, "Oh, hello." He says, "Hi." And I go, "Wow, your voice is really deep." He goes, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Great." So we get up, and I'm leading him to where the picnic tables are so we can eat our food. As I start walking, he doesn't start, so I just slow down a bit. And I turn around, he still doesn't move. So I'm like, "We're gonna go this way." I start walking, turn around. He's about 8 feet behind me. The entire time to the picnic table, he does not get any closer or any farther. I keep stopping while we're walking to see if he'll catch up with me, and he just does not. He decides that he would like to be 8 feet away from me at all times. But we spent about 3 hours in the park. I finished my food. I don't think he likes it, so he stops eating it. I learned very little about this man on the date. By the end of the date, all I wanted to do was go home because I was socially exhausted. I do not like talking to myself for 3 hours. So we get up and we say goodbye, and I go, "Oh, we have to walk back to the car." And he goes, "Yeah." So we start walking back to the car. Again, he is 8 feet behind me. There's no reason for that. He also wouldn't let me carry the trash when I picked up the trash. He took it out of my hands without saying anything. We get to my car, I unlock it, I open the door, I look at him. He looks at me. I say, "Get in my car," and I drive away. He texts me about an hour later and asks me if I'd like to do it again, and I tell him no. But then he Venmoed me for the sushi I bought. So he's a good person. At least we have that. Goodbye, Zach.
Now, that was way more work than I expect anyone in this room to put into their final video. Simply like the crafting out the narrative and this and all of the B-roll, but you can tell how he took one little interview and instead of simply trying to do it with pictures or something, he actually went through and acted it all out himself. Not something I'm expecting you to do. So last time in class, we looked at a few others, including just bring this one back up. So as we're talking through this today, I think Lee is, yep. Watch through this one as well and take note of the different camera angles, and then we're going to talk
My
about
name
that.
is Tyler Copain. I'm from Tacoma, Washington, and I'm a photographer. I initially got into photography because living in Washington, there's lots of pretty scenery. And when I was given a camera, I would just bring it on hikes. And I went to a lot of concerts. And so I started bringing it with me to that. And then shortly after, I learned that it was something that you could make a living doing, shooting shows and shooting musicians. And that's kind of what I decided I wanted to do. I decided to transfer to online school because having to drive to campus to take classes 5 days a week was kind of getting in the way and making me have to turn down photo shoots and other creative opportunities and travel opportunities to spend time doing what I want to end in.
So you can see there's all kinds of different shots that are incorporated here. So let's go ahead and talk about the process of shooting video for your final project and some of the different approaches that you can take. So first, when we are walking through, let's see, let me open it back up here. Thanks, Dropbox. Like it says, your process is to interview, shoot, and edit quality images, photos, video, audio, do a little sound design, and add some music. So I've showed you a bunch of different examples of what this can look like. And last class, we ended with just practicing a little bit of interview, questioning another partner in the class or just somebody here in the class. So next class, one of the things we're going to be talking about is how to make sure we can utilize available light. We might actually get to that today. Available light and get good clean audio for whenever you're going to be doing this interview. So typically, the farther away your camera is, the worse the audio is going to be for pickup and the less we can do about making it sound good in Premiere after the fact. So, but one of the things I want to walk you through now is talking about what to think of in regards to video and the settings you can choose. So bust out your phone if you would. Bust out your phone. We're going to look at some different settings in here. So the process of shooting our video needs to involve step one, we got to have our story. And this is the reason that I'm having you just start off with an interview, because in that way somebody else gets to create your story for you, and then your job is just as the videographer to figure out how to tell that story through visuals, sound effects, music, etc. So the story is going to get taken care of for you. Obviously, if this was a totally narrative film or TV show or webisode, we'd have to create that. Then we need to make sure our camera's in good shape, that we've got specific settings and choices in terms of resolution, frame rate, because that's going to change the way it looks, and as a result, the way people feel when they watch it. Then we're going to understand a little bit more about capturing audio, not just sitting at a computer with a nice little USB mic, but how do we get good audio if we're trying to be out in the field or capturing somebody on an interview. We're going to look at lighting and then a bit of direction. So we know that when we're talking through, or based on our experience in editing in Premiere, we've got speaking shots and we've got B-roll. So the script obviously is going to come from the interview itself, which you're going to edit down either in Premiere or Audition. And that's going to give you your primary shot. But then we need B-roll, obviously, to give the further reinforcement to whatever it is that we're talking about. Same reasons we put in the sound effects in the last project. So this B-roll is supposed to visually represent or enhance what we are seeing on the screen, because a show where you just watch a talking head for a long time can be pretty boring, including right here. So the first thing to understand about your visuals is the number of pixels in the image and the resolution. So first is frame rate. So can someone explain to me frame rate other than what you see right up here on the screen? Yeah.
Amount of frames per second.
There you go. So the number of pictures per second. If we were to go back, and I'm going to kick open Premiere, and once it fires up, we'll look at the impact of some of these different things. But the number of pictures played back every second when we had Premiere open, it's trying to jump off to another screen. Just open up the last project. So for example, this music video project of Imagine Dragons, every single one of those is obviously a still frame that we've advanced through and rewound before. So 24 frames per second is the film standard here in the United States. So the number of pictures taken every second, 24 frames per second. Can anyone tell me how many frames per second the television standard is here in the US? So if you're shooting for television or video, traditionally, it's going to be, anybody know? What? It is 30, but technically it's 29.97 frames per second. It's a standard we're not going to go into now just because most of that stuff is done automatically for us on our cameras now, but people will just round it to 30 unless you're around professionals, and they'll specify 29.97 because while film is shot at 24 frames per second, it's not the only standard. In Europe, film and TV is all done at 25 frames per second. So you can imagine, how would you get from 24 pictures per second to 25 or 30 or vice versa? Well, you got to either throw some away or figure out what was happening in between those frames. But the result of that is, as you play back these different frame rates, they all have, let me see if I can get this GIF to play. it's going to impact the smoothness and the blur of the movement between the frames. So in America, if you've ever watched the difference maybe between something like a telenovela or a soap opera on TV, everything is crystal clear. The action feels very like natural and HD, whereas watching a movie, a lot of times because it's shot in a slower frame rate, it creates more blur between the images, which actually looks more like what our eyes experience it. So if I were to scroll down here, here we go. You can see if you go the higher frames per second, can I blow this up? No, well, let me blow it up. You see how smooth the action is with very little blur on the 60 frame per second. You see more what we call motion blur on the 30 frames per second, but it still is moving enough to seem natural to our eyes. But 15 frames per second, how many of you say that it's actually jittery? So what they ultimately found was 24 frames per second in the early days of film was a good balance between what humans could actually see, clearly showing the movement, the motion blur looking most like what our eyes naturally experience. So for example, if I were to take my hand and move it back and forth quickly, my fingers probably appear to blur together for everybody. So 24 frames per second best simulates that. 30 frames per second was chosen as the American standard for TV for reasons outside of what we'll talk about today. But just knowing that we have changes or different options for frame rate actually gives us other choices too. So pop open your phone and let's look at some of the settings you guys have. So go into, if you've got an iPhone, you can go into your settings and then go down to, I think it's general. Camera? No, let's see. It's just probably settings and then camera. Yeah, I just do a search for camera. Okay, so when it pops up, we looked a little bit at this with our photography, but if you click on the first one, you should see something like formats. And formats, you're going to see two options, one for high efficiency and one for most compatible. So one of these says, or at least on mine it says, most compatible will always use H.264 for videos. So that's a video standard. 4K, which is the resolution, at 60 frames per second. 1080p at 240 frames per second. And HDR will require high efficiency. So how many of you have high efficiency or most compatible? So this is the file type now. The new one, high efficiency, is H.265. This is Apple's newest standard, and many other companies have also integrated it, though not all. There's competing video standards out there. It's much harder on a computer to edit. So if you're planning on editing, especially on these computers, I'd recommend you switch to most compatible, at least for any shooting you're going to be doing on your phone. You won't see a visual difference. The files will be slightly larger, but they will take, they'll be a lot easier if you're editing on these computers or your computer at home. If you move on to one of the new M1 MacBooks or M1, the ones with the M1 or M2 chips, they designed special circuits inside of them to be able to process this high efficiency footage quickly, but any normal older computers struggle with it. So be aware, let's switch to high compatible on that. And then for record video, flip that open, you'll notice a bunch of options. Some even newer than what I've got here. So who's got 720p option? So what does that mean? 720 pixels wide? Yes. So what that actually is showing us is 720p. Bring this image up. Looks like a good example. It's hard to tell in this difference. So in this case, what you're essentially talking about is 720p versus 1080p is the number of pixels in the image. So how many physical little pixels are allocated to creating that image? So standard definition video, what we worked with until maybe the late 2000s, was 720 pixels wide by 480 pixels tall. What's the impact of that when you blow it up even bigger or you stretch it across a bigger screen?
The pixels more distinct.
Yeah, each one of those pixels has to cover more space, and as a result, your image gets more blocky, more blurry. There's less detail, especially in areas of fine detail like leaves or grass or hair. All of a sudden, you miss all that. So eventually, there was another standard, 720p, that was 1280 pixels wide by 720 tall. So all of a sudden, that could be either blown up onto a bigger screen and still retain little details, or when played on a smaller screen, could appear to have even more detail. And then we got HD, which is what most of us still shoot in, 1920 by 1080. So that's 1920 pixels. So you can imagine if you squeezed that many pixels down to a smaller screen, you're still going to be able to maintain a lot of detail. But it doesn't go the other way. If you shoot in a lower resolution, the bigger you stretch it, the more blocky and the less detail it's going to have. As of the last couple of years, we now have 4K. How much bigger do you think the files are if you shoot in 4K versus 1080p?
Gonna be extremely massive compared to an HD.
Yeah, they're going to be, on average, 4 times larger. Look at it right here. You're shooting every DVD or video until the last couple of years you've ever watched was shot in 1080p, probably at the most of your life for sure growing up. But as of a few years ago, because manufacturers need to sell new devices with more processing power and something to do with it, we started with the 4K standard, and there's actually a couple different versions of it. You'll see it called 4K, which the technical standard is just double the 1080p standard on both sides. So 3840 by 2160 is exactly double 1920 by 1080. But as a result, those files will take 4 times the size. Now, a good 4K camera means, though, if you're shooting something with a lot of little detail, it'll actually be able to capture those little hair wisps in the wind. Will people be able to watch or see them if they're watching them back on their phone? Probably not. If they play it back on a big screen TV, maybe so. The thing you got to factor in, though, is the trade-off between how hard do I want my computer to have to work if I'm shooting something in 4K versus 1080p, where anybody's phone even can process that pretty quickly, and your computers definitely can. So, wanted to point that out. So for when you're shooting your videos, for this class, for that matter, you could shoot it at 720p, 30 frames per second. If you're just going to play it back on a normal size screen, you're not going for the highest visual quality, and you want it to be the most easy on your computer, you could choose that lowest one. Then you also see mine only has 1080p at 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second. So the main thing you want to decide on is, what do I want my most of my shots to be? Are they going to be 30 frames per second, 24 frames per second, etc.? I'm going to say you should mostly shoot this whole project at 1080 30 frames per second. So I would set it to that, both to save your time and energy transferring the files, editing the files, etc., if you want the computers to run most efficiently. If you want the most cinematic look and you're okay with waiting longer for things to render, kick it up to 4K at 24 frames per second. That 24 frames per second is going to look more film-like. It'll give you a more filmic sort of feel, but 4K, the files are going to be 4 times bigger. Everybody making sense there? Now, here's the other thing. Let's just say I'm just going to preach 1080p 30 for now. You shoot at 1080p 30 for all of your main shots, but when we're getting our B-roll shots, I would come in here and I would switch it up to 60 frames per second. Why?
There's gonna be shorter flips.
Okay, they'll be shorter. Slow motion. You can take a 60 frame per second clip and play it at half speed, and there will still be how many frames per second? 30 frames per second, so at half speed. And when you're shooting slow motion clips, or clips that you want to be able to smooth out and smooth the motion, switching them to 60 frames per second, shooting your B-roll clips, then when you drop them into Premiere, you can slow them down up to half and have these beautiful cinematic slow motion shots that then just add to your story. So those are the only 2 settings I would be switching between for our project here to wrap things up. Questions about this? All right, ask me one question about either frame rate or resolution. Which one is going to take the largest amount of space on your computer? 4K, 720p, or 1080? Okay. Which frame rate will give you the most cinematic look? 24 frames per second would give you the most cinematic look just as at playing at normal speed. But if you want to shoot a shot that you can later slow down to 24 or 30 frames per second, you should shoot at what frame rate? 60 frames per second, exactly. Because you can actually slow down 60 frames per second by 60% if your final project was going to be at 24 frames per second. So just a couple things to keep in mind there, as well as a note for how to play them back or how to choose them in your phone. Now, the one other thing I want to point out there in camera is most of you probably have an option to record slow-mo. Does everybody have that? So record slow-mo. If you tap into that, you'll see mine has the options of 1080p at 120 frames per second. How much could that slow down to then give us 30 frames per second? A lot. So if I was trying to capture something that's really fast moving, like bubbling water or some sort of just fast motion, anything, then something like 1080p at 120 frames per second is going to let me slow it down dramatically. But you'll notice some of them even go higher. Mine will give me the option of 1080p at 240 frames per second or 720p at 240 frames per second for regular most compatible mode. So in other words, I could choose 720p, it'll slow it down a lot. We will slow it down 10 times, but it would be lower quality or lower resolution. So it would look a little less focused and clear if we stretch it back up to a full 1080p size. Okay, questions about that? The one thing I would point out with this is, if you use the slow motion mode in your camera, the file that it kicks out actually is 30 frames per second. So it shoots it internally at 240 frames per second. But when you go to transfer it to your computer, the file you will get will have that slow motion burned in. If you shoot at 60 frames per second, you can determine how fast or slow you want, because that'll actually be 60 whole pictures for every second. So I'll demo some of that next time in class, but I just wanted to introduce you to where you can change these things. And then let's talk about shot types, because I wanted to hopefully get to a little bit of time where we have some time to do that. So a few reminders from things that we looked at when we were first taking photographs. Right? We want to make sure that we leave a little bit of headroom, but that we center people's eyes and or smiles there on the rule of thirds when shooting, especially head-on shots. We talked about framing at the beginning of the semester, making sure that our frame is good, that straight lines are straight, that vertical lines are vertical, that they're not tilted or we're completely whopper-jawed. Although I will show you how to fix some of that in Premiere, even if you have some shots that are a little bit off or a little bit shaky. But then we also want to make sure we have a variety of shots to tell our story. So it's very natural and normal for us when we're videoing. Most of us have had a video camera, most of you have, for your whole life. In your hand, you've had one that just gets better every single year. It gets better image stabilization. You don't have to have like a really steady hand. These new phones really do magic work for us. But most of us are used to simply pulling it up and shooting it from eye level, wherever you are, probably somewhat close to me. And as a result, it doesn't really tell a very compelling story. Has anyone ever had a friend be like, oh, here, I want to show you all my videos from vacation? And after about the third or fourth video, you're like, I get it. All right, like I'm done seeing the videos. That's cool. But there's no variety in shot. There's no story being told, or it's not a story with focus. And as a result, we want to make sure we use a variety of stories because angles, because they give us different feels. So our different camera shot types are going to create different feelings as well as help move the story in a way that draws us in. So when we talk about some of these different shots, you can tell that the angle that they chose and the location they've placed themselves creates a different feeling for the scene. So for example, what's the story you get from this? What? Into the unknown. Interesting. Why? Well, the angle we've got is kind of a low angle, but looking up. The weight of this, we've got the sailboat kind of balanced over here with islands right here, and it uses that diagonal framing that we learned about in the beginning of the semester. Leading lines draw our eyes to the adventurer up front. Every line leads us to the adventurer, so it kind of makes me feel like, okay, we're on some sort of journey, some sort of adventure. Cole? Oh, sorry, I thought you did.
Yeah, I probably would have said the same thing.
Oh, cool.
Kind of an adventure.
And how about this one? What's the story you feel on the right side? Pierce.
I feel like kind of like a utopian society.
Interesting. Utopian. Yeah, a little paradise. It's interesting. I can definitely get that feel. And this is what we call an establishing shot, or in this case, the angle is a wide angle shot. because you're seeing a huge amount of the environment that this world is happening in, but it also establishes that idea, like there's some sort of joyous, happy, unless they're escaping war, but the things are like it's really bright in balloons. Wouldn't make any sense. All right, so the first shot we've talked about, wide and extreme wide shots. You can get these on your phone by flipping to, go ahead and kick open your camera. And I know most of you may know this, but I assure you, having taught this many times, not everybody does. So when we're going to shoot on our phones, there's a couple other settings we want to tweak. So of course, depending on the phone you have, you should have either the 1x lens or the 0.5x lens, and make sure you flip to video mode so that you can see this. So with video mode open, I'm not recording right now. You'll see on the left-hand side, upper left-hand side, there's also the frame rate and the resolution that you're shooting at. If you tap on that, you can tap on the frame rate and the resolution to change them. Has anyone ever done that before? Some people didn't know that. So if you tap on HD, you can toggle between the HD and the 4K settings. And if you tap on the frame rate, you can quickly toggle between the 30 and 60 frames per second. Got this? Okay. Now, in terms of other changes or adjustments, you should know that you can flip it from the side. If you swipe to the left, you'll get an exposure adjustment, which will then allow you to raise or lower the exposure of the image. Now, the iPhone does a pretty great job, though not a perfect job, of automatically adjusting the exposure. Sometimes you want to lock it in. So because the light is changing and you want it to stay focused. So if you're pointing at somebody's face and you want them to be the exposure lock, you can press and hold on their face or press and hold on the thing, and you'll see auto exposure, auto focus lock. Whatever happens, it's going to stay locked on them. You can also press and hold down, and when you go to auto exposure or lock, you can drag up and down on the little sun. That will change the exposure specifically. Now, if you drag it down, you'll notice it gives you a much darker, much moodier look, depending on the feel you're going for. This is something you can change right as you capture your image. You'll notice having a lower exposure is going to change the feel of it by having that darker feel. Or if you want to over brighten things just a little bit, be careful with overexposing because you can't really fix it after the fact. Set mine to 0. All right, so with our wide shot, see how much of the room you can see. Yes, Nora.
Yep. And I love like the low exposure look. Like for some reason, whenever I do it and there's like a bright light, it always flashes.
Yes. So try a couple different frame rates for that. Because what's happening is the light is flickering at approximately 60 frames per second. So if you're shooting at 30 or 60, if it's just slightly off, then especially fluorescent lights are known for causing flicker. So in video, yeah. You can try switching between a couple different frame rates, but let's try this first. So I want you to point around the room, find yourself a little establishing shot as a wide shot, and I'm just going to grab a quick 5-second video clip of this room. You do the same. I'm going to get a couple just so we can see, have choices afterwards. Get them no longer than 5 seconds. Now, don't forget, for our purposes now, we're shooting in widescreen. It is possible that vertical video will take over like the cinematic and narrative world at some point, just like it's taken over the online and social world. But for now, we're going to practice shooting in widescreen 16:9. All right, so wide shots are oftentimes used as master shots or establishing shots. They give you the context of what's happening or the environment that it's happening in. So an intro scene here to a movie you've probably never heard of. about a young boy wizard. But you can see that the really wide shot establishes they're in this giant dining hall, etc. But even here, a wide shot is only showing a few people, a family sitting at a table. But it brings us into this context before we start cutting to closer shots to focus on individual characters. Hey, here's where all these people are. Now, let's see. So once we've started with a wide shot, typically we're moving into something more like we tend to interact with people day to day. So medium shot is going to be typically from around the shoulders up, so or kind of just below the shoulders up, so you can see everyone leaves is kind of like hitting just about mid waist or so, but moving up. So it's a medium shot. That's kind of how, if you look around right now, the way we focus in on people, that tends to be the parts that you focus on. You can see the rest of it, but if you're looking at someone, you're really just kind of focused on eye to eye, and so your brain kind of registers from out their waist to a little above their head. So this gives us more detail, and it captures them, giving us the ability to frame their facial expressions to see how we would interact with them day to day. Now there's some varieties on the medium shot. The two shot is when we need to communicate in the script that we've got to have both characters in. So if we're doing a medium two shot, you can see this is something of a medium two shot, capturing from about the waist to a little above the head. And here is more of a close-up two shot. You can see we're getting really tight in on both characters, and they produce different feelings. The closer we get to our characters, the more intimate or involved we feel with whatever's happening with them. So we also have the variation, which we've looked at, I think, back in the photography days of this class, where the cowboy shot is kind of medium shot, but where you've pulled out just slightly, and you would basically imagine if this were a gunslinger with a gun on their hip, and my back far enough to basically above the knees to just above the head to give this sort of a shot. And then finally, as we are still talking about medium shots, the concept of the over-the-shoulder shot. So the over-the-shoulder shot is something of a two shot because you have both characters, but you're only focused on the expressions or words of one so that we can stay focused. And this gets us close to the action, almost a voyeuristic sort of feel, but without feeling like they're talking directly to us. So it still gives us some emotional distance. So let's go through and find a person or two around you, and let's grab, we just grabbed establishing wide shots. So now we want to go to medium shots. For this, I'm going to kick to the 1x lens on my camera. Make sure I'm still shooting in widescreen. I realize it is possible for your phones, I think, to shoot video in square, but I'm going to encourage you to make sure it's in widescreen. So now with the medium shot, I want you to pick a partner or so, and let's grab an establishing, or not an establishing, but a medium shot of them. So just again, 5 seconds, but I want you to grab a couple different angles of it. Just 5 seconds or so. You can take turns, you can pose, you can look off in the distance, you can look directly at the camera, but find a way to grab a quick medium shot from a couple different angles with another person in the room. These three can work together. Jess, Randy. You can stand up, you can move around. But again, your medium shot should be approximately just above the, around the waist, to above the head. I'm going to run you through. Feel free to stand up and walk around the room a little bit.
Can't do that. Like I'll just show this.
Jess, can I work with you?
Yeah.
Awesome. Grab this little medium shot of Jess. Jess.
It's going good. What about yours, sir?
Yeah, it's going good. All right, here we go.
How's your day been?
You know, my day has been busy. I feel like I jumped up and I've been in the deadline ever since. Okay? All right. Make sure you're shooting in widescreen. Flip that camera sideways. Now, grab a couple people and get yourself a two shot. You can either go a little more of a close-up two shot or a little bit more of a medium two shot. But you should have two faces in the frame, framed up so that you've got the two shot in there. Now, when you're doing these, I want you to do it two different ways. I want you to grab the shot from your own height, wherever you're naturally doing it, and then I want you to change where the camera is and reframe it up higher, and I want you to do another shot and reframe it low. While you're up and about, when you're done with that one, move around, reframe with a cowboy shot.
Yeah. So I woke up during the night like 3 times.
I'll leave it on cowboy shot for another minute. We're just cycling through these.
Oh, wait, from where? Oh, I can like water.
It's so hard to make guys.
The next one will be an over the shoulder, which requires trading out some spots. You're going to shoot this collection of shots, and then we're going to edit them together just against some music so that we can visually compare on a timeline. But the thing to experience with all this is that as you're getting these different shots, again, our natural inclination is to just shoot from however our vantage point is, however tall or short, however we look at it. But now it's about learning how to use that camera to tell a different story and putting it in places that you maybe wouldn't necessarily go. Again, try when it makes sense, try a little high and a little low. Go a little farther to the right, a little farther to the left. You're just grabbing very short clips, 3 to 5 seconds.
Oh, we're not taking photos.
No, these are videos. Yes.
Right now?
We're doing this right now?
Yeah, maybe in 15 minutes.
Over the shoulder. Now it's time for a close-up shot. Close-up shot is when the face fills the frame. So right at about top of the head to bottom of the face. An extreme close-up shot starts to get even closer where we're losing the mouth or the eyes. Something to think about, something I want you to add to it. Depending on, I want you to try these close-up shots with both lenses. So I want you to grab a quick close-up shot with the wide-angle lens so you can see the distortion that happens onto human faces when you have a wide-angle lens, especially up close. Then the 1x lens, and then grab another quick couple seconds with the 2x lens if you have one. The 2 or the 3x lens will give you a very different feel in how those faces look on camera. Huh? Yes, you can. Now again, you're grabbing videos for these, not photos. But you also, huh? Yes. You also can have the experience of, or you can start to add movement to your shots, which can add a new dimension of energy and life. So we have certain things like a push in, where you, instead of zooming, you're physically moving the camera closer to the subject, or a pull out, where you're physically pulling back. So push in, push out. You also have dolly moves, where the camera is moving side to side. So as your camera is tracking sideways, your dolly, it's because we used to only be able to do it on a track and dolly. Big enough handheld like that? Depends. There's a bunch of settings you want to get for it. Like, you're probably shooting at 60 frames per second for sure, because the ability to slow it down to 30 or 24 will smooth it out automatically a lot. And then warp stabilization can help from there too.
You think, I mean, think something like Gimbal would be worth it? 'Cause I mean,
It depends. If you're going to do a lot of that stuff, yes, most people live on a gimbal. But there's also the option for the non-electronic gimbals, like the handheld stabilizers. That a lot of people swear by, and you pick those up and use them forever, but they take a chunk of practice to get real fluid with them. All right, the next couple shots, reaction shots, you know, is not necessarily a different style of shot from a two shot or a cutaway, or not a cutaway, but a medium close-up shot. But it's more about what is happening in the shot. In this case, it shows when somebody is reacting to it. Now that can obviously be framed a number of ways: two shot, wide, close-up, etc. But you can see that really you're grasping the reaction. At the same time, a cutaway or an insert shot is designed to add more detail. In this case, from, I forget which Dracula movie this was, but you can see both first with this medium shot, medium close-up shot, that he is looking down at his hand. The cutaway shot is looking down from his perspective at the hand. So then cutting to yet another angle, it's basically adding additional shots of different angles to be able to further tell the story. It's one thing to connect with him emotionally if he's looking down at his hand and he's like, you know, you really, at that point, have to, like, he has to really show the emotions on his face for you to feel anything. But how many of you get that second shot and you go, oh, and then you get to the third shot and you're like, oh, right? So these insert or cutaway shots give us further context. So what sort of shots could you get in here that might provide context to whatever you were doing otherwise? Maybe somebody was talking and their hand, maybe they talk a lot with their hands and you want to cut to a close-up of their hands. Or if they were working on their computer, you could cut to a low-angle close-up of the fingers on the keyboard. Or you could cut to a point of view shot, where you're then cutting over to where you're seeing things as them. And that can be medium. Typically, it's some sort of wide angle. But these are some other types of shots that wouldn't necessarily make sense given what we've just shot. You know, right now we were practicing angles, but a reaction shot delivers additional reaction, which draws us into the scene. Cutaways or inserts further add to and tell the story. And point of view shots momentarily put us in the position of the character that we're inhabiting at the moment. Although there has been a few movies made, certainly a bazillion video games made from a first-person point of view shot, but there's actually even been a couple of movies over the last 10 years or so made that were entirely from a first-person point of view, which is very unusual. But it is interesting. Huh?
the first-person movies haven't done so well, have they?
I don't know. I don't feel like any of them have torn up the screen, but there was one that I thought was really entertaining.
The Johnny, like the action movie, the Johnny.
Yeah,
or something like
yeah,
that.
something like that.
Documentary.
Yes, I think that's right. All right. So, okay, so take those clips and you can sit back down for a second. I find there's no experience like actually holding your camera and doing it to see what it looks like. All right, let's reinforce that. Take a second, flip your phone back open, go to your photos, and start to flip back through those. Mentally see, I want you to think about a couple things. What do the different angles communicate about the story? Do you have a different feeling when you see the wide angle versus the medium shot versus the close-up shot versus the extreme close-up shot? Take just a second and flip through those. How does it change the feeling when there's two people clearly in the frame or when we're looking over somebody's shoulder? All right, pause for just 1 second. Okay. So the different angles that you can get communicate different things and different feelings. So for example, a bird's eye view, how does that sort of shot make you feel? Anybody? Like you're flying, okay. Anything else? Anybody subscribe to Thalassophobia on Reddit? No? Fear of things in deep water, right? So if you maybe you guys haven't seen enough shark movies, but r/Thalassophobia. If you're not terrified of deep water, you will be after that. So, but in this case, some people would see that and think, oh, like that's freaky. This reminds me of, I think in spring break, my wife and I went parasailing at the beach, and so you're hanging 300 feet up, looking down, and boy, it's a very different feeling then. In fact, this picture makes me feel quite different. But then you've got eye level, high level, and low level, or high angle and low angle shots. You can see when you're with Katniss Everdeen at eye level, you feel like, how does it make you feel? It's not how it makes me feel. Huh? Yeah, a little intimidated because she's barreling down right, like that arrow right down your gullet. How about this one? How's this character feel? Scared? Apprehensive. Anything else? What do you know about what else is happening in this scene, or what do you feel is happening in this scene?
Meeting somebody new that's taller.
Yeah, something big is just out of frame, right? Something big. We've been seeing this sort of thing for all of human history and even before. How about this one? Yeah, in this case, these characters are not feeling intimidated, right? They're doing the intimidating. So a low angle in this case, or the shot where they're at a high angle, is obviously, it creates a different emotion. So all of these create different sort of styles and shots. So now I want to open this back up and look at a couple of these things. We're going to play through the rest of this one real quick, and I'll just pause it and you tell me a little bit about the shots. Okay? Okay, we're just going to go through kind of piece by piece. How would you describe this one?
Establishing shot.
Yeah, wide angle sort of shot. So in this case, wide angle. We can see the whole character. We've got him out on a beautiful fall day.
Not in a physical classroom, I've had to make efforts to come up.
What's the camera doing? What kind of a move did we call that? Would we call that when the camera is moving towards the subject?
To come up with some.
A push in and a push out. Okay, push in and push out are when the camera is moving towards the subject or away from the subject.
A sense of normalcy, so I've tried to develop some good habits.
Where's the location of their subject?
Rule of thirds.
Rule of thirds on the top left line. This would be a cutaway and high, low, or eye level shot. Yeah, so we've got a low angle shot. So we've got a low angle shot that was a cutaway to get us from wherever he was in some driveway to wherever he's going. Help to tell the story.
Cooking on my own food.
What? So another cutaway, yeah. Or an insert shot, same thing, yeah. Okay, angle, high angle shot, looking down. Okay, size. You might call that, yeah, a close up or a medium. I'd call that a medium close up or a medium shot because you can see other things except for the subject. Once you get into that close up, you're really starting to see not a whole lot else. And an extreme close up, you're really focused in. Like the camera would be right inside the spaghetti.
Food and doing things like that. But as far as work
Okay. How about this one? How would you describe it?
goes,
Okay, another cutaway. Yep, medium shot, I would say. Medium, maybe medium close up of the computer is how I would describe it if I was writing it on a script or putting it on a storyboard. Medium close up. Anything else? Love the use of the rule of thirds, even in the way they position this. By putting the camera down and at the side, you created a much more interesting, the camera open along the bottom one and then opening diagonally all the way through into the top right third of the rule of thirds.
I always try to stay up to date with editing, so I'll spend a lot of time.
Over the shoulder. So we've got an over the shoulder shot. It's not quite a point of view shot, but this over the shoulder shot is drawing us in as a viewer, as a voyeur into what is being created. So he's working there on his computer.
I'm on my computer, replying to emails and reaching out to clients and trying to set up new stuff.
Okay. Kind of a wide angle shot, but this also is a cutaway. It's cutting us away to another
A
place.
shoot that I'm really proud
Mixed in with another over the
of
shoulder.
is
High angle, or low angle? Low angle, shooting up, right? So that we can see him shooting into the trees.
that a couple months ago, one of my favorite singers, Elliot,
What else has happened to the background? Can you tell what they've done with the this background clip of the trees?
a
Nope.
couple months ago, one of my favorite singers, Elliot Skinner, and I got to do a photo shoot.
They shot it at 60 frames per second and slowed it down to 30. Actually, in this case, it looks like they shot it at 30 and slowed it down to slower than even 24. Because if you slow it down slower than 24, that's when it starts to get a little jerky, and you can actually see that happening right here.
There's Elliot Skinner.
Do you
and
see
I
how
got
it's
to do a photo
jittering
shoot
just a
together.
little bit?
We met
They
for
might
the
have shot it
first
at
time
30,
in
but slowed it down at like
drove up to this
20.
farm,
And so it
we
gets a
pretty much
little
did
grunchy when you do that. So be aware, if you slow it down to where there's less than 24 frames per second, it will start to look jittery.
photos that was like very last minute and on the fly, and they're still some of my favorite photos I've made to this day. All that I want to be doing is be creative.
Interesting one here. How would you describe it? Very low angle, right? From underneath. Anything else? Where'd they position him? Lower left third of the rule of thirds. On the left side of the rule of thirds with some, what do we call this space in front of the camera that generally you want to leave open, but it's the direction where the viewer or the subject or whatever is looking. Not headroom. Headroom is above their head. Breathing room or looking room. We want to leave space in front of wherever the subject is looking for, we either call it leading room or looking room. Where are they looking? And we leave the greater amount of the space on that side of the frame. Okay,
Creating with people that I love.
very cool. Let's jump back real quick and do the same thing with Nick's story.
All right, friends. So today,
Because that month I got my first job. We wanted
All right, so they start their story. What have they got? It is an establishing shot. It's a little bit wide angle, so it's somewhere between a wide angle and what else would we call this? Based on where she is in the frame. The camera is cutting from where to where? Cowboy shot, because it's just above her knee, right? If you can imagine her holding or with a gunslinger sort of thing, like how far down the gun would go, right there along the side of her leg, then you would call that a cowboy shot. So we kind of got a wide cowboy shot, 3/4 shot.
we wanted to eat while we were there, have like a little picnic because it was during the mid part of the pandemic. So before I got to the park, I picked up sushi from one of my favorite places called Bang Bang.
Okay, so you notice two different shots here. What was happening with the movement on this shot?
I picked up sushi from one of my favorite
What? Yeah, So in this case, the camera is tracking down her. So as it's moving down, or it's booming down. So because it had to be done on a boom arm in the past, you'd have to have a giant crane to be able to move the whole camera rig up and down. Now you can get very small ones, or you can even simulate it. Cameras are so small, you can simulate it on a small pole. So, but here you can see it's booming down to start at her face, waiting for her date, and booming all the way down to the food that she brought, which further tells the story.
It was called Bang Bang Hibachi Grill. So I went and I
Okay.
picked it up. I bought all of it. I go to the park. He can't find where I normally park at to eat at the picnic table. So I'm directing him there. He finally gets there. I'm sitting at a park bench, and I've been there for about.
Okay. What angle did they choose? Okay, medium shot, medium kind of close up. So medium close up. Well, it's not really close up. That's definitely still a medium. Okay. What else? What angle did they choose? High level, low level, eye level, or high angle, low angle, eye angle. Yep. So they went eye angle. So how does that make her feel? Equal, right? So what if they had chosen, or accidentally without intention chose, and they'd shot her from a high angle? How would that change the tone of the story? It would make her seem smaller. Would it give maybe a little bit of a like uncomfortable angle? Like, why is she small now in this frame? Is this story about to take a bad turn or something? Whereas if they had framed her the opposite way, framed her with a low angle looking up, making her larger, more powerful, you could actually tell a very different story. So I'm pointing all of these things out so that you start to be intentional and think about this. And moreover, before you shoot this project, as you watch movie or TVs over the next week or two, you're starting to notice this. Wait, what angle are they choosing here? How close is the camera? How wide the lens? And what are they trying to make me feel? Because a good movie, especially if you go back and watch your favorite movies or something now, you'll really start to notice what a difference it makes and how the great movies draw you in by their camera choice and that angle choice.
15 minutes.
Last couple things.
Stands over me and doesn't say anything. When I finally notice his shadow, I look up and I go, "Oh, hello," he says.
What do they choose here? Yeah, this low angle that tracks up from down here. It does a tilt, and so it tilts up to his face. And while making him seem a little bit creepy and a little bit like overbearing, which I think that was kind of the vibe that they were trying to get.
I go, "Wow, your voice is really deep." He goes, "Yeah." I'm like, "Great." So we get up, and I'm leading him to where the picnic tables are so he can slow down a bit. And I turn around, he still doesn't move. So I'm like, "We're gonna go this way." I start walking, turn around.
So you can see the use of wider shots, closer shots, and even some extreme close-ups like with him that create a very different feel than if everything was just a series of wide-angle shots. You can see, how does it feel different being this close to his face and his reactions and his awkwardness and uncomfortableness as opposed to if it was still a wide-angle shot? Does anyone feel like this makes it that much more uncomfortable? As it should.
But we spent about 3 hours in the park. I finished my food. I don't think he likes it, so he stops eating it. I learned very little about this man on the date. By the end of the date, all I wanted to do was go home because I was socially exhausted. I do not like talking to myself for 3 hours. So we get up and we say goodbye, and I go, "Oh, we have to walk back to the car." And he goes, "Yeah." So we start walking back to the car. Again, he is 8 feet behind me.
Okay. Now, she says he's 8 feet behind her the whole time. How far does he look? Okay. What else makes him appear to be very far away? Okay. Perspective 2. What else? What lens width did they go with? Telephoto, regular, or wide? Wide. And the wide angle makes the background seem what? Closer or farther? Farther away. So a wide angle lens makes him appear even farther back, further facilitating this idea that this guy kept this wild, uncomfortable distance the whole time. Now, what would have happened if they'd switched to a telephoto, a 1x or 2x or 3x lens? On the newer iPhones have 3x, maybe even 4x. Yeah, the more telephoto the lens, the more it compresses the background and brings it in close. Let's see, telephoto. This is wide angle. So something like this, for example, you're seeing a wide angle lens of these versus a telephoto lens, which squeezes the background and the mountains in together. The wide angle shows much more of the background. The telephoto squeezes those backgrounds. See, even right here, the difference. The longer the telephoto lens, the more it compresses the background and brings it closer to us. All right, so let's see. Questions more about this.
He also wouldn't let me carry the trash. Picked up the trash, took it.
So for a first film, pretty impressive. And again, certainly not something that you guys do not have to go to that level, but I did want to show you a couple different examples of how people had done this. All right, let's see where we're at. Workshop type
My
list.
question is, how did it last 3 hours?
Huh?
I feel like it
The
definitely
date? Nice. Well, okay. So your homework for next class is to, let's see, I know people are going to be heading out for Thanksgiving, but my goal was to have you upload just a very small example of each one of the different shot types. So that's why I also gave you some time here in class to be able to do this. So, and cutting together from wide, close up, or let's see, yeah, wide, where's my medium shot? Medium, close up, extreme close up, cowboy shot, etc. So what I'm going to do is give you the last 12 minutes of class. If there's any shots you didn't get, go ahead and grab those shots and go ahead and, I would say, upload them to Blackboard so you can have it done. Again, we're just looking for very, very short snippets. And I'm going to open up the thing. I'm going to put a little music on and stop OBS recording.